Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, and here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Welcome back to the Gold Standard for episode 20. 20!
2-0.
20.
We did it.
We did
we're
it.
Still doing this. Unbelievable.
Hang the mission accomplished banner.
Right there.
Yeah. Even though we
Nice.
haven't actually done anything, we're going to put the banner up because that's what you do.
We're going to toot our own horns.
Yeah, that's right. So episode 20 of the Gold Standard, I am your host, Alan Mosley. And if you want to follow us on social media, Facebook is facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter @Alan M. Mosley. Of course, you can find our show on YouTube. Just search the Gold Standard Podcast. And our website where all of that stuff is. And so we do this every week.
Why don't we just put everything down there for this?
And Blake puts it at the bottom of the screen right there where you can read the gold. I need to which is it the gold? No, or is that way?
No, it's that way.
It's this way.
No, it's the other way.
It's this way. The goldstandardpodcast.com.
That's right. There you go.
All right, so now you have the unfortunate task of trying to go in, and it's okay.
Putting it down there.
So at 37 seconds, Alan's pointing at the freaking screen, so I got to put it's going to be like tilted because I'm tilted.
All good.
And yeah.
It's all good.
Well, that's why we have you.
That's right.
Because you're an expert. and speaking of experts and people who join us on our social media page, we have one of our friends back to the show, Sherry Voluntary.
Hey, Sherry.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm wonderful, and from what I'm here, I'm pretty fabulous.
So is your arm still broken?
No, but I can't straighten it.
How'd you break your arm?
Being old.
I know the feeling.
You know what? I don't know the feeling.
No, you don't.
No, I feel great.
Good for you.
Nothing has gone wrong for me, really, in the foreseeable past. I don't remember anything ever being bad. Yeah.
All good, man. All good.
So, Sherry, thank you so much for joining us for episode 20. We've had, and I don't really want to get into a big thing, because if I get into a big thing, then Blake will hit the switch and the camera will go to me, and then I'll be on this little monologue about how now I'm there, and now I'm on this big monologue about how everything is just shitty, and things suck. But
I do that just to scratch my nose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. So for people who are watching at home, when the camera switches from Blake to me, Blake is just using the restroom.
Yeah, I've gone off camera to do something else.
Yeah. But that's okay. And you know what? We have yet to have this is just how uninvolved our audience is. We haven't had anybody call in to tell us how to get rid of this thing.
Right.
This you see, I'm pointing like that. You see that?
Yeah. Yeah, the little bug over there.
No, I'm pointing at me.
It's over there. It's in the bottom screen that way. But what we're going to do is, in case you guys haven't noticed, we're going to put the Gold Standard logo like right over that as a bug, is what we call it in the TV industry. Like this right here. Poof. See it? Now it's gone. Now you have that cool little Gold Standard image to watch for the rest of the show. It's going to cover that up.
So now this is a disaster because now you have two things that you're going to have to go back at.
I've already at this point that you're watching this, I've already done that. See, doesn't that look cool?
So
but you can't. But we can't see this while we're recording it. But you at home get the glory of watching that cool little bug on the corner.
Okay, so my first question for our guest then is, Sherry, are we in the past or the future?
Have you guys ever seen Spaceballs?
I don't know. Yes, I have seen.
Then you know the part that I'm talking about. Is this now? Or how can we go back to then? It's modern Marvel technology. Yes.
My favorite parts. We're being jammed, and there's the rat.
Lodestar. Yes.
Have you? Okay. So this interview is going really well. Yep. So have you seen Infinity Wars yet?
I have not.
I'm not talking to you.
Okay.
I'm talking to Sherry.
Bye.
Yeah. And now,
I have not, Alan Mosley.
Okay.
I've been bad in my duties. I can't think of the word.
You said duty.
I feel like when the camera doesn't have you on, you should be quiet. Because it ruins the illusion of whether or not you're here.
True. Okay, I'll be quiet when I turn me off.
When I turn me off. Story of my life.
I think he's heard that before.
Yeah. Okay, so is a hot dog a sandwich?
No, a hot dog is a sausage, my friend.
No, see, you always misunderstand this. We're not talking about just literally the length of meat. We're talking about the whole finished product of the hot dog in the hot dog bun.
Honey, it's always about the length of meat.
Stop it. You're a very naughty lady.
I feel like now is a good time that we should be reminding everybody, if you like what we do here at the Gold Standard and want to support the show, you can go to the donation link, which is found at the top of the goldstandardpodcast.com, as well as become a monthly Patreon subscriber on patreon.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Why is everybody laughing? I don't understand.
I don't know. Maybe so that we can buy a longer piece of meat.
I feel like see, my first thought is that everyone's laughing because they're thinking, why would anyone pay for this?
If you're not laughing right now, you...
Modern technology has come along.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
Well,
babies with power tools.
Are you ready? Are you ready for the segue?
Yes, we are.
You know what will not make you laugh?
What?
Is the subject of today's episode.
Yes, which is why we're trying to be lighthearted right now.
Actually, we're already at like 6 minutes, so really we should just wrap things up.
No, you go on this, man. This is one we need to cover. This is a big deal.
So I'm switching over to the article real quick, so we'll see you later, Sherry. Actually, you're still there.
Yeah, she's just up in the corner.
So when we switch to an article, Sherry stays and I'm gone. And when I come back, there'll be like 17 of us and one Sherry.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Okay.
Only one Sherry.
Yeah.
Here
only
we go.
one.
Look at this, man.
Have you ever noticed that every time I make an analogy about a random number, it's always 17?
No.
I do that.
I'm not that good at numbers.
Yeah, I don't
get it either.
I'm starting a hashtag called One of 17, the Alan Mosley podcast.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm one of the 17 actual libertarians.
Yes.
There's
only 17 of you.
Yep. Because the rest of them aren't real libertarians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, you're entitled to your opinion, but hey. So what have we got on the topic here today, my friend?
So today we're going to talk about the story of a man named Matthew Charles. And this actually comes from our neighborhood. Of course, we used to film in beautiful Columbia, Tennessee.
Yes.
Now it's no longer beautiful Columbia, Tennessee, but the studio conspicuously looks the same.
Yes.
But it's not the same.
Okay.
But this actually comes from a man from Nashville, Tennessee, named Matthew Charles, and I want to just tell the story of Matthew Charles real quick before we kind of get into the weeds of things here.
Okay.
So one of the articles we're going to reference today is from Giulietta Martinelli with Nashville Public Radio. And the title of the article is, "As he heads back to prison, a Nashville man says goodbye to the new life he hoped to build." Well, that sounds awfully sad.
Yeah, it already's got me by the heartstrings.
So we're gonna stay upbeat during this because, I mean, being red in the face isn't going to help anything for Mr. Charles.
I know.
So Matthew Charles was a young man in Nashville. Of course, he's a black man. He had not finished high school. Came from an abusive family, and this is the tired old story, and so he gets into selling drugs, and I really don't want to make the focus of today's episode the drug war, not really, because this is really more a criminal justice story than it is a drug story. And so he gets caught selling drugs, and what happens for a lot of people, for people who haven't been sideways with the law because maybe they're not selling crack, we know you really are. Sometimes they'll cop you a little deal where if you go join the army, and that'll keep you out of jail. Yeah. And so that's what he did. And I understand, look, we're really harsh on the military-industrial complex and law enforcement and all that on the show, and rightfully so. But I understand that for some people, that's sort of a grounding experience. They go into the Army, they get a little discipline, they come out of it with some semblance of direction in life. Look at Sherry. She's so...
You said a little discipline.
Yeah.
So,
we can't...
Yeah. It's hard to be serious with that smile. So what are you gonna do?
Don't have her back on the show. so anyway, but that was not the case for Matthew Charles. He got out of the Army, and really his life had just been on pause. It's not like it got magically better.
Yeah.
And so he just went back to what he knew, which was just being back out on the streets and selling crack.
Yeah.
And he gets caught again. He gets caught selling to a police informant, and a couple of really, from a criminal justice standpoint, a couple of really tough things happen for Matthew Charles. For one, since this is not his first offense, the feds take this thing over and they label him a career criminal, a career offender. So, like he's like the Joker now in Gotham City. Yeah, he's a super villain now because he got caught doing the same thing more than once.
Right.
And like I said, I'm really not here to talk about that aspect of it, what he was doing and how he was doing it. Yeah. It's really more what happened next.
Right.
So since he's a career criminal now, he gets sentenced to 35 years in prison. 35. There have been all sorts of thieves, rapists, and murderers who don't go to jail for 35 years. Or at the very least, they get a sentence, and then the sentence can perhaps be reduced for behavior or extenuating circumstances and the like.
But not this poor guy.
Not this poor guy. So what happens to Mr. Charles is he gets sentenced to 35 years, and then after serving 21 years of that sentence, so fast forward to a couple of years ago, he's in his early 50s now. So, I mean, his life... I don't want to say the phrase "his life is over" because it's not over. You can live many more years and have a happy life. You're not going to die at 51 years old. Hopefully. But his youthful prime of a man's life has come to an end.
Yeah.
And he gets out after 21 years, and this was due to some reforms that were passed under the Obama administration that applied to him that basically said, for really long prison sentences for certain offenders, he can be let out early.
Sure.
And so he gets out. He gets out, and he's out for 2 years, which is important because in 2 years he's sort of reclaimed his life, right? So he's got a job, he's got a new place to live, he's reconnected with his family, he's in a serious relationship with a woman, bought a new car.
Yeah, he's got his life together.
Yeah, he's got his life together, and he's. For what you can do, having lost a couple of decades, you're moving on.
Yeah.
And then he gets a call from the U.S. Marshals saying, hey, man, we need you to report back to jail. And as you can imagine, especially when you've been out now for a couple of years, and this is one of those things I'd love to talk to an ex-con specifically about the anxiety factor of wondering, if I get a speeding ticket, are they going to get me for jaywalking and send me back on a parole violation?
If you spit on the floor, are you going down the road for 30 years more?
Yeah. And so he gets a call saying, hey, man, you got to go back to jail. And so what had happened is there was a mistake. There was a bureaucratic mix-up where he should not have been on the list of people released early because the reform to reduce sentences should not have applied to him, and the argument from the DA was specifically that since he is a career offender, and that's really an important aspect of the story.
Right, because a career offender can never be reformed, right?
Yeah, so since he's literally the Joker, he doesn't get a reduced sentence. And so he wasn't supposed to be let out, so he should have to serve the full 35 years.
Yeah.
And now this is where things sort of really get upsetting, if that's not already upsetting enough. And so you have this guy, this guy who has turned his life around, this guy who volunteers at soup kitchens and goes to church, and this guy who, while he was in jail, finished his degree, became a law clerk.
Yeah.
Actually,
a law clerk.
What he was doing was he was volunteering a lot of his hours to read correspondence and explain things to other young inmates, people who were where he was 20, 30 years ago, who are illiterate. And they you send them a court letter, what does that mean? And so he was trying to help people not be where he was.
Exactly.
And so the judge who is ruling on his case, because what this is this is an appeal process by the state. So the district attorney representing the state is appealing his reduced sentence on the grounds that since he is a career criminal, it should not have applied to him and he should have to serve the full 35 years. Now, the judge that ruled in this case understood that because of mandatory minimum laws, because it's a federal case, and because by the letter of the bureaucratic nightmare it was a mistake, the judge understood this guy's going to lose. Yeah. He's going to lose this. He's going to lose this appeal, and he's going to have to go back to jail. But I don't want that because as a judge, really as a human being, right, I can look at this and I can see that the community is not served by Matthew Charles being in jail for 14 more years. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, right?
I mean, the guy turned his life around. I mean, he had everything going for him at that point.
So there's no reasonable argument under any stretch of the imagination that Nashville or the public at large is made better by his being imprisoned for longer.
Exactly.
And so the judge wrote a letter to the district attorney's office basically explaining that, look, you're really putting me in a tough position because morally I object to this case and to his imprisonment, and I understand that you're going to win this case and Matthew Charles is going to go back to jail, but I don't want that to happen.
Right.
And so I'm asking you to drop the appeal, because if you do that, judges don't walk around presenting cases. They hear cases.
That's right.
So if the DA does not go back to court against Matthew Charles, then it's kind of one of those, well, there's just a wild ex-convict on the loose. Oh, well, can't find him. And it's just sort of, you just turn a blind eye and look the other way. Yeah. Because in the what's the word I'm looking for? For the purpose of justice being served, we feel like justice has already been served. Yeah. Nothing more needs to be done.
Right.
If you drop your appeal, this case goes away.
Yeah, it just goes away.
The DA responded to the judge's office declining that motion and saying that we full-heartedly believe that as a career offender, Matthew Charles should serve every single minute of that 35-year sentence. The extenuating circumstances are utterly irrelevant in this case. They consider it their moral crusade to make sure this man goes back to jail for 14 years after having now been out for 2 and restarted his life. And as of this reading, that is in fact what happened. Yeah. So the appeal was successful, his sentence was reinstated, and Matthew Charles is in prison right this second.
For 14 more years of his life.
For 14 more years. I think he's 53. So he got out at about 51, was out of the farm for 2 years. Yeah. So then he's 53. And now, I mean, he was thinking before, I've restarted my life, things are good. If I'm a lucky man, maybe I've got 30 more years to make up for what I've missed. And now he's looking at, we'll revisit that when I'm 67.
Look, I don't care who you are, but there needs to be in place some sort of system where you look at these extenuating circumstances of somebody's situation and can see the humanity in it and do something right. But what happens is we live in this authoritarian, vile, we have to punish these people for the rest of their life for one little small egregious sin against society. We got to stop sending good people, or even people who made a mistake, okay, to jail for 40 or 50 or 60 freaking years of their life for something stupid, okay? You murder somebody, you destroy somebody, you do something horribly violent, you kill 1,000 people, that's one thing. But I don't necessarily think that selling crack is right and you should be allowed to be doing that, but the point is, it's not murder. It's not destruction. It's not hell on earth. It's just trying to survive in the hood. That's one thing that gets me on this. And the second thing is 35 years? What did he do? Tear his mom's head off? Anyway, that's my rant, and it makes me mad because I think our justice system, you throw a cigarette butt on the floor and you're going to jail for 40 years. For Pete's sake, don't leave your house.
You know what you need? You need a Fitbit, and we need to have that wired into the thing so that as your blood pressure goes up, there's a gauge on the screen, and you can see it's like a real-time view of how mad
it just makes me crazy. It makes me
Blake
absolutely
is. I know it does.
I don't understand. Get a speeding ticket, $5,000.
I think we have to remember too that the crimes aren't crimes against society. The state does not care about what they do to you or I.
Yeah,
it's a crime against the state. That's the problem. The state has.
This was a federal case too, just so you guys know.
The state has deemed that this substance is bad and this one is allowable. So if you partake or sell the bad substance, what they've deemed bad, then you have committed a crime against them. Yeah. Not that you have actually done something wrong. So
4 or 6 years. You know?
Well,
if you serve 1 year in prison, you're going to remember that, man. Okay? But 35 freaking years? Somebody's taking that to the extreme.
We have a retribution system, not a justice system. No. And that's what it's about. It's about retribution because the authority has gotten pissed off. You have bucked the authority.
You did say bucked, right, with a B. Okay, I'm just making sure.
Bucked.
Yeah. We got to start bleeping.
Yeah.
This is what we got to start doing. Well, I just wanted to say real quick for the sake of us and the audience too, when we say the state refers to the government apparatus.
Right, the
so
federal
we're not talking about the state of Tennessee.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even government. We're talking about the force of the system that is in place upon us, that we do not have the right to say no to certain things.
So what you're saying, we're not talking about liberty, we're talking about force.
Right.
Force.
Okay.
Right.
Liberty, not force.
Okay.
Right.
Got you. So one thing I want to bring up, because like I said, we've done episodes about the drug war, and I'm sure we'll do more, and I kind of wanted to stay away from that for the sake of this conversation, just because people, if you've watched this show and you know where we stand in our libertarian principles, you should probably figure that we're against the drug war.
Yeah.
But it's not just being against the drug war. It's the fact that. So as you had pointed out, not talking about drug decriminalization per se, but just at how is justice served?
Right.
So
how is 35 years of your life taken from you for selling a little controlled substance?
So
a fair and balanced punishment.
But let's unpack this. So and Sherry, you can help me out here. So let's unpack this for a second. So why is murder bad? Let's bring it way down. So why is murder bad? Because for you have destroyed that person's life in the most literal sense.
And everyone they know.
Well, hold on. So you've destroyed that person's life in the most literal sense, and it's irreparable.
Right. Irreparable.
They don't get their opportunity back. They don't get their experiences back.
They don't respawn.
Yeah. So
no way to pay damages for that to them. Yeah. There's no way to recompense them.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. And so it's one of those little mental exercises where people will say, so what's the cost of a life, and yada yada yada. And I understand for the sake of damages in a lawsuit of an accident, you have to come up with a number. But in real terms, it's not that the number is infinity. It's the number is blank. It's incompatible.
Right.
Because there's no amount of reparation will bring back what was lost.
Exactly.
And so that's why murder is so bad. And so and so along the same line, when you decide that say you've wronged me in some way, and you're arrested for this, and they're saying, well, we think a jail sentence is called for here because you've done some sort of wrong. Mm-hmm. This is a serious conversation, right? Because even if and we know our prisons are an absolute nightmare. But and once again, we're not even going there yet. I don't want to talk about that. But even if your stay in prison was literally just a padded room with some books and no one ever raped you or anything else, even if prison was humane, it's still every day, every minute, every year that you're in prison, that is time that is gone from you, and nothing you do when you get out can possibly purchase back the time you lost.
Right.
So it's very serious, and I think that's something that's a bit lost on people. I think the average person, when they're sitting at home and they're watching nightly news or whatever, and they hear, oh, Joe Bob robbed the quick sack, and so he's getting 15 years or whatever, and I'm not saying it's never justified. I mean, if you do harm, you destroy things or hurt people, then punishment is justified.
Yeah.
It's just that there has to be some semblance of understanding that if I break into your store and I bust your windows, you have to replace those windows, and you should want me to be held liable for those damages.
Right.
But there's a difference between me being held liable for the damages and maybe plus interest, or maybe I have to pay for the windows plus I have
and
to
some sort of restitution beyond that.
Or I owe you some amount of man hours of my labor.
Exactly.
That's a far cry from go sit in a box for
15 years, which still doesn't replace my broken window or my peace of mind.
I think we have to go back to the whole concept of prisons in general and jail time. And, it was started as more of a religious concept to have some alone time, a little time out to rehabilitate, to get right with God. That was really where the U.S. prison system sort of began. I don't think that even covers what they do now. Now it's about the time. So you hear people talk about, well, they killed somebody and they only got 20 years, and whether the amount of time is not the issue, it's the amount of what the person needs to get to be rehabilitated, to get corrected. And so I think people, especially in the United States, I don't see this so much in Europe, but in the United States where people, they really want a huge amount of time. Like, what's 2 life sentences? You can't serve that.
No.
It's symbolic for them. They're not looking at, like, I think about my own life, and I think you have to do this to really personalize how much time is spent in prison. That 20 years ago, I am a totally different person than I was 20 years.
Exactly.
And I think if anybody thinks in those terms, they can see 20 years is a really long time. And most people haven't done things that deserve 20 years.
No.
Plus, when you go into the prison system, you're not able to pay restitution, right? So you're paying the state with your time. You're not paying that family or those people.
Actually, we're paying for you. But
You haven't paid that restitution, and it really limits your ability to pay any restitution in the future. So, yes, people do bad things, and that's going to happen. But the punishments need to be about getting a person back to either being a productive member of society, or if they're so dangerous that they do have to be put away from the rest of people, then there should be no corrections or rehabilitation about it. And I think that this gentleman, he disproved their theory that once a career criminal, always a career criminal, just for the fact that he rehabilitated himself against all odds, because everything in the system is set up to keep you a criminal.
Right.
And I think that's pretty simple.
So, I mean, just using their own terminology, it's the correctional system, and they call it that. I mean, that's traditionally what it was known as. I mean, prisons as we know them today versus just being kind
Gulags.
of, prisons were basically just kind of like open courtyard madhouses where people just sort of came and went in the turn of a century ago. And then prisons were reformed more to what we at least traditionally think of them as in the late 1800s, early 1900s, to be a correctional facility, where the idea was they should go in because some wrong was committed, but they should come out prepared.
A better person.
They should come out prepared to enter the workforce, or or
be improved.
Well, and of course, during that time, it would have been, to re-enter to society in such a way that they're benefiting their family and their community or whatever. And so we know that's hogwash. We know
now
that's
just revenge.
Yeah.
Now it's just absolute vengeance. And hatred.
Yeah. So a couple of different things I want to point out as we're talking about the case of Matthew Charles. So really quick, going back to the article, and the reason I use this article, This was just a heart-wrenching story, because this particular article, as he heads back to prison, a Nashville man says goodbye to the new life he had hoped to build on Nashville Public Radio. It's really more, it's an explanation, but it's really more following the final days of his freedom before he goes back to jail. And it's not the story of an angry person, because look, man, I'll tell you first thing, if I'm that guy, I would be so angry. You want to talk about a career criminal. I think people put in the situation that Matthew Charles has been put into, you might be seriously contemplating doing something much more aggressive.
Because it's not fair.
No, it's not.
No, and it's not right that somebody else out there who doesn't know you or care about you has the power to destroy you completely at their own whimsy and then go home and sleep in their own bed that night like it's just another day at the office. These are human lives. Yes, somebody did something wrong, but you don't take their whole life away.
So hold on. Are you all right, man? I'm worried about you. I really am, because I've like this is as heated as I think I've ever heard you.
Yeah.
So I don't really care a lot about change.org. It's pretty much mindless nonsense. But if you go to change.org, there is a petition, commute Matthew Charles's prison sentence. And of course, this is a federal case. So the governor of Tennessee, not that the governor of Tennessee would give a damn about Matthew Charles, but if it were a individual state issue, then the governor could do something.
If it was a state issue, he wouldn't have got 31 years.
35.
35.
So, but unfortunately, even if you or I were the governor of Tennessee, there's very little we could do for the man. Mm-hmm. So the only person on planet Earth right now that can do anything for Matthew Charles is Donald Trump, President of the United States. He alone has the power to commute his sentence because he's been sentenced to a federal prison.
So he should be commuting this guy, not Jack Johnson.
Well, he should have commuted Jack Johnson too, but we'll get to that. Hold on. We're getting there.
All right.
So, he's closing in on 27,500 signed. They're on their way to their $35,000 goal. So a lot of people are aware of this. Overwhelming majority understand that this is not serving justice.
Yeah.
So I definitely suggest people go and check that out.
How are these 8,000 more people?
Well, that's just to the next goal. They up that goal every time you meet it. So anyway, the reason I wanted to bring up that particular thing is to really drive the point home. So he would have to have his sentence commuted by the president, but there's precedent for that. So in 1956, Congress passed, because we just love our elected representatives, that they passed the Narcotics Control Act. And the whole point of the Narcotics Control Act was to institute harsher sentencing for drug offenders.
Right.
I mean, this is just coming straight out of the draconian drug war in of itself, and if anything, this was sort of like signaling the beginning of the drug war, if I would even go so far as to say that, where the idea there is that, well, if we just have harsher sentences, if we're just telling people that they're going to go to jail for 30 or 40 years for dealing in cocaine or marijuana or whatever, then less people will do it. And not even getting into the moral ramifications of that. But President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, between 1961 and 1964, he actually commuted several hundred people who were sentenced specifically under the Narcotics Control Act sentencing. And the reason he did that was very specifically to send a blanket message to Congress that I think that you need to take another look at this, and I think you need to reform sentencing for drug offenders, because I think just on its face, it's just kind of silly that depending on where you are in the state and the extenuating circumstances, you can kill somebody and get out of prison before a drug offender can. And so Fast forward to more recently, under the Obama administration, he also, to his credit, he also commuted a few dozen cases. Now, that's a far cry from several hundred, but he did commute a few dozen cases. But there's a difference in principle between these two precedents. For one, when John F. Kennedy did it, it was specifically to send a message to Congress that I don't have, Congress is the body that legislates, and I can't legislate from the executive. Imagine a president thinking that now.
Yeah.
And so, but I do have the power to commute sentences. It's one of the very few what I would call an absolutist power of any branch of government is the power to commute a sentence. And so so he was sending a principled stance that, and I'm not saying that JFK was for drug decriminalization outright. We haven't been so fortunate to have a lot of congressmen or presidents that thought that, but he did believe that justice was not being served in this manner, and so he was just taking that. Well, if their sentencing falls under that act, I'll just commute the sentence, which is his right to do as the executive. Well, and Obama did it as well, but it was on a case by case basis. And you could even make the argument that, well, it's good to look at things on a case-by-case basis because we would be less sympathetic to someone who is violent.
Yeah.
And we would too.
Right.
I mean, we would be less sympathetic. It would be a harder argument for us to make that, well, he was selling drugs. We don't care about drugs. Oh, but he also beat up a bunch of rival gang members with a lead pipe or whatever. I mean, obviously, yeah, we'd say, well, you're not, you shouldn't be doing that. But Obama didn't really take a principled stance. That was really more of a political posturing thing.
Yeah,
that, well, I'm gonna commute some sentences because I'm kind of feeling the way the wind's blowing, and people are hot for pot nowadays, and so I'm gonna commute some sentences.
Yeah.
And so the point being is that the precedent is there. And Donald Trump, trust me, if there's ever been a president that I'm sure would be more than happy to use all the powers at his disposal, it's President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so President Trump has every opportunity to make this right. So we here on this show would absolutely call for President Trump to commute the sentence of Matthew Charles. If he was here right now and he said, Alan, give me, a 60-second argument for why that's the case, it would be, let me ask you, I'm going to answer a question with a question, which I know is terrible. How is justice being served by this man going back to jail? How is it served in the first place that he was in jail for 21 years? That's a question in and of itself.
Yeah,
but the past is the past. We're gonna let that go as much. I wouldn't let it go, but Matthew Charles has. Matthew Charles has let that go.
Yeah, which is amazing.
It's a testament to his character in his later years. But how is justice being served by this man going back to prison for 14 years? How will the Nashville community be better? Because it would be easy for us to make an argument it would be worse. The community would be worse by having him in prison for 14 years. But definitely, how would the community be better by having this man go back to prison for 14 years?
Wouldn't make a difference.
So really specifically, notice, I'm not talking about drugs per se.
Right.
I really want to keep the message on criminal justice reform on how, inappropriate or unappropriate sentencing, it destroys the family.
Yeah.
You're destroying the community by taking people off the streets that even if they did wrong, even if we agree that they did wrong, and even if we agree that some punishment is in order, you're only breeding more contempt and hatred and ignorance. You're only adding to fatherless children and less educated overall population. Right. The number of people that are not smoking crack right now because they didn't buy it from Matthew Charles is irrelevant to all of the emotional and material trauma that has been created by him being put back in jail.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to point out that there is an even higher cost than, time is something you can't get back, but there's the lost opportunity of the time when they get out that they have, because that opportunity for something nonviolent is basically gone from them. There are many places that won't hire them, and they can't then become productive citizens. So, citizens. So, if you really care about having better communities and having people that have been involved in things that aren't the best, because we know life is all about incentives, right? Then you incentivize those things to happen. And putting someone in jail for that or in prison does not incentivize them to then get out and do better. It actually incentivizes them to go back into the criminal world, because they, like everyone else, love their families, love their the people that they're responsible for, and they have to make money. They have to feed themselves and their wife and children, or husband and children. So then they are more incentivized to go back into doing illegal activities, because they have less opportunity now for something that was nonviolent. And there's a real disconnect, and that's part of the problem with authoritarianism. It's not about the severity of the offense. It's about the fact that you offended the authority.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And people have to start looking at it differently and not have this flip attitude that I friggin' hate. Well, they did the crime, they got to do the time. Well, the time is not proportional. The punishment is not proportional to the crime.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. And just because the state calls something a crime does not make it a crime. And one more thing. I think that mandatory sentencing, as you were mentioning, Alan, actually undermines the authority of the judge.
It does. It completely does.
Yeah, the legitimate authority of a judge, because there are legitimate authorities, and in a society where you want people to be able to have recompense, you need a judge to work all that out. So the judge, you're saying this person is intelligent and educated on the law, and they're fair, and we want them to be the arbiter of what is the fair thing to do in this. And yet you have these people sit up there, but you're making laws that take this person who is supposed to be intelligent and understands the law and what's appropriate, and you're throwing all that out the window and saying, just do what we want.
Right. Now, there's a group called Families Against Mandatory Minimums, which is a national movement right now that you can go and you can look that up online. You can Google Families Against Mandatory Minimums and be part of that movement, where we're trying to push to have the federal mandatory minimum thing removed and allow the judges once again to have control over what sentencing is. And when you take away a judge's ability to do what a judge is supposed to do, to choose the actual time served for the accused, well, then what's the point of having a judge?
It's really reactionary. So it's reactionary from people saying, well, that's not enough time. I don't feel like there's enough time for what they did. But that's all subjective, and we can't have law and subjection. Like, you can't do that. The judge is heard the case. They should make those determinations. And, sometimes judges make the wrong call. That's going to happen in a free society.
That's why you have appeals.
Right. And for the most part, they will, if they're a good judge, they'll follow what's appropriate. And you just have to live with sometimes that things go wrong, but mandatory sentencing and the way the state does it it makes things go wrong more of the time than just actual human error.
Right. Well, you guys are stealing my thunder, because that's actually going to be my closing segment. I'm going to talk about judges for a minute in the judge aspect of this case, because we're running out of time. You've probably heard us on this very show before criticize judges, whether it be the Supreme Court or anywhere else, as a blanket criticism of the fact that the judicial is not the legislative. And so legislation is done by Congress, and there's there are reasons why we have the three branches of government. There's reasons why we don't want an executive to rule by executive order and decree.
Right.
There's a reason why we want the legislative branch to be producing legislation and voting on it, and there's a reason why we want the judicial branch to administer the law and to judge. But this is but to be clear, I want to explain the difference there is that when we criticize judges for, quote, ruling from the bench, that criticism stems from the fact that if their judgment flies contrary to legislative law, I mean law as in you cannot have this yellow cord, and the legislative branch decided that, and then a judge says, oh no, that's fine. Well, the judge is actively combating the will of the legislative branch.
Right.
And there's a reason why we have separate branches, is that that's not your job. Your job is not to legislate.
Right.
That's Congress's job. So if a popularly, I mean, of course this is all in theory because I'm an anarchist, so they can all go to hell.
Right.
But in a popularly elected Congress would legislate based on the will of the people in theory. And you wouldn't want what they would call an activist judge just ruling willy-nilly based on my feels and not what the law says. I get that. That's a separate issue, though, because this isn't. We're not saying, and once again, because we didn't really attack the drug war in this conversation. We're not arguing from a position of, well, it should be legal to sell crack. I think it should, but that's not where I'm arguing from. I'm arguing from after the fact. After crack is illegal, you were caught selling crack. Now, so we're not changing the legislation. We're not trying to rewrite the law. What we're trying to say is that now the judge who has now deemed that, yes, Matthew Charles, you are guilty of this crime, you are now being sentenced. We're not changing the fact of the case of guilty or innocent. We're changing of what happens next. And in the case of Matthew Charles, what happens next is you're getting 35 years because the overlords from on high have deemed to me, the judicial branch, that you are going to serve a minimum of X amount of time.
Right.
And this takes the agency away from the judge, because what does a judge do? Like I said, we don't want the judge writing laws. That's not the judge's job. But we want them to judge, that hence the name.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know, they are supposed to be, because basically all judges are former lawyers, right? They're supposed to be people who are experts on the law, who understand the law as it is written and enforce that. In their ruling of guilty or innocent. But a judge does two things. The case doesn't, when they say, in Blake, you are guilty, everyone doesn't then just go home. No. The case isn't over. There's the sentencing. And so that's when you would want a well-informed individual on the bench to look at all of the circumstances of the case and say that, well, we all agree that Sherry is guilty of wearing the polka-dotted top. And so, and then we have a law against that in Knoxville, and so Sherry's got to go to jail. But if you look at the extenuating circumstances, and you say that, but you know, outside of that, she hasn't broken any other laws. She hasn't done irreparable harm to the public at large. The community has not been worsened by this fact. So I am bound by the law that has been passed down by the legislature. I am bound by the fact that she has broken a law and I must rule against her. But I'm not bound to not look at Sherry and look at the circumstances and decide that, well, she broke that law, but you know, I genuinely, you know, if I feel that she's genuinely remorseful for having broke this hypothetical law and she's never going to do it again, and there's been no irreparable harm done, then I might say, well, time served. Or
you are hereby sentenced to burn that dress on the public square.
Or you know, even if this is something that's so awful that you have to go to prison, you know, somebody having to go to jail for a few years, you can't put into words or money how much is gone, because you can't, because it can't be brought back. Once it's done, it's done. So we would want our judges to have empathy. That's not being soft on crime.
No.
That's not you know, giving an open license to the genuine career criminals to go out and feel that, you know, the positives of their committing crime so heavily outweigh the negatives because they don't stand to lose. We want people who genuinely harm society to stand to lose at a greater clip based on what their infraction was.
Yeah.
But what we don't want is we don't want to have a situation where it's just a robot, and when the guilty button is clicked, a little ticker tape comes out and says, well, there's your sentence. There's your, as they would say in the old gulag days from Solzhenitsyn, you know, there's your $5, there's your $10, there's your 15. And then that's it. That's the end of the case.
No one
evaluated anything.
Yeah.
So
sucks to be you.
And I want to say too, because we gotta kill this because the show's already running way too long. You know, I want to say real quick too, the judge did do that in this case. The judge did say that, well, gosh, my hands are tied because the law is what the law is, but I don't want this. I don't want this to happen, so I'm going to, within the law, do everything in my power to stop this from happening, which was I'm going to reach out. And that's not something that happens very often, by the way. The judge is kind of crossing the aisle, so to speak, and going to the DA and saying, please don't do this.
When do judges appeal to DAs?
Yeah. Please don't do this. I'm speaking on behalf of this criminal because I feel like justice is not being served. Help me out here.
Yeah.
And
this would have been a great case for nullification.
Yeah, this was a great case for nullification.
Yeah.
And really this would have been more personal nullification because the law is what the law is, and goodness knows the law is not going to rule on the side of the people, but the people involved. And this is another perfect reminder that when we say the feds are not robots. They're people.
Yeah.
They're people in a different position of authority or power. I shouldn't even say authority, power.
Yeah.
But the feds are people. The state is people. We're people.
Yeah.
People are just people. And so the people involved in this case who may or may not have a position of power or authority had an opportunity to come together and say, we're going to effectively personally nullify this decision by simply walking away.
Yeah.
And some of the people involved took that stance. Unfortunately, the district attorney's office did not.
Right.
And so,
U.S. Attorney,
yeah. And so Matthew Charles is in prison.
Yeah.
Glad they're spending our stolen money on that prosecution.
Yeah. Well, if you know, as soon as they figure out how the Russians got involved in the election, and as soon as they get all the drugs off the street, really as soon as they get all the drugs out of the prisons, then they can get all the drugs off the street. And then, you know, but that's one of those things though, right? Like it's always just one more thing. Like if we could just pass one more law, if we could just put criminals in for a few years longer, if we could just, then
there's no justice at all.
Yeah. Wow. That almost sounded prepared.
It wasn't.
I don't believe you.
No, it wasn't prepared. Sometimes a blonde guy can actually pull it out.
Well, I think we're going to end it there because I feel like the longer this goes, the angrier we're just going to get. But Sherry,
thank you.
As always, it's a pleasure for you to have been with us. Even though now you have to go burn. Yeah.
Graced by all of your joy and, positivity.
Well, I mean, you know me. I'm known as the spreader of joy. So what?
Joy spreader.
You spread joy.
You just hear from the other side.
Kind of like fertilizer.
Yeah. Okay. That sounded prepared too. We're gonna talk about this after. We're gonna talk about this after the show. We're gonna have to rein you in. This is a couple of weeks in a row now where I feel like the Blake-o-meter has just been a little bit over.
Careful, I might put one of those on the screen.
The Blake-o-meter. That's right. So once again, real quick, if they want to find Sherry Voluntary, Sherry, where can people find you?
Right now, I'm on Facebook at the Sherry Voluntary Show. Also, iTunes, SoundCloud. You can ask Alexa to play Sherry Voluntary Show, and it should pop up if you have the little deal set up. So just about anywhere. Mm-hmm. And here at the house.
And here at the house. Do you have a real show yet, or are you still not numbering your episodes?
I'm working on it, Alan Mosley.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just. Yeah, I know. I'm just giving her a hard time. So that's where you can find Sherry Voluntary. Sherry, thanks so much for being with us yet again. And guys, real quick, what was it last week or the week before that I actually didn't even say our
It was the week before.
I didn't even share information at all. Yeah. So
I put it up there anyway.
Yeah. So real quick, Facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley, where you'll also find that we share stuff by Sherry as well.
Yes.
Twitter at Alan M. Mosley, thegoldstandardpodcast.com, and I think the rest of this month is going to be pretty hopping.
Yeah, we got some real cool stuff coming.
We got some real cool stuff coming up, but we're not.
A long point, but the rest of the month.
Yeah. So so this episode was really forgettable to say the least.
I don't think so.
But well, it's not. Well, we're still technically as of filming, we're still technically in May.
Yeah.
So this is a May episode, but right. June's going to be where it's at.
Yeah, June's where it's at.
You know what? I have a sneaking suspicion that we'll probably see Sherry again, though.
I do too.
Yeah.
And she's always welcome.
Yeah. Anyway, are we good?
We're good, man. Much love.
Join us next week.
Bye.